Good evening and welcome to the Sandwich Mendota Area Reliability Transmission Project Virtual Open House, the ComEd Smart Project. My name is Travis. I'll be your host for this evening. We're going to go through a brief presentation where you'll learn more about the project. And then at the end of the presentation, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions via text through the Q&A button at the top center of your screen. If you look at the top, at the very center, slightly to the right, there is a button that says Q&A, and feel free to type in any questions you may have. And at the end of the presentation, a panel of subject matter specialists will answer your questions. At this time, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Jasmine, who will walk us through a brief overview of the project. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and welcome, Jasmine.
Thank you, Travis. So this the agenda for the presentation will give a little bit of an overview about ComEd. We'll do the project overview, purpose and need, project timeline, the routing process, some components of real estate, engineering, the project map, overhead construction process, and project feedback, public feedback, and then we will go open it up for a Q&A. Right, just like Travis said, this is the Sandwich Mendota Area Reliability Transmission Project. And a little bit about ComEd. We are a unit of Exelon Corp, a Chicago-based utility powering the lives of more than 4 million electric customers across northern Illinois, serving 70% of the state's population. Smart project, just a little bit of an overview. The Sandwich and Mendota area is experiencing new business growth, which has created the need to strengthen the electrical grid by improving the overall system's performance and resilience. ComEd is proposing a new 30-mile double circuit 138 kV transmission line that will run through DeKalb and LaSalle counties. The line will run from the existing Sandwich substation in Sandwich, Illinois, to the existing Mendota substation in Mendota, Illinois. As a part of this project, the Mendota substation will be expanded to support the proposed transmission line. Prior to finalizing the route of the transmission line, ComEd will participate in the CPCN, which is the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity process, as outlined by the Illinois Commerce Commissions, which must approve the proposed line. And over here to our right is just a depiction of what the grid looks like, the energy grid. We'll get the power generated from examples like a power plant that will go down to the transmission lines and then be stepped down at the substations or transformed at the substations to the distribution lines, which will be connected to the homes and the businesses. The project purpose and need. The SMART project's purpose is to strengthen the transmission network in the greater Sandwich Mendota area to resolve critical capacity and reliability constraints. The upgrades will increase hosting capacity for distributed energy resources like solar and battery, improve system resilience, provide an additional outlet for generation under contingency scenarios to support customer load on the ComEd system, enhance operational flexibility that allows us to prepare for diverse energy uses and meet national and regional standards by addressing needs identified in the PJM, a regional transmission organization that coordinates movement of wholesale electricity in all or parts of 13 states, including Northern Illinois and the District of Columbia. This will be included in their regional transmission expansion plan analysis. By reinforcing transmission infrastructure, ComEd will support regional growth, enable increased capacity, delivering more electricity to meet rising demands, and provide significant energy savings. This is the example of the project timeline. Right now, we are in the Q1 with the public involvement process with the open houses. We have 3 rounds of the open houses, and then we have the virtual open house that we are at tonight. Once the routes are selected for the preferred and alternate, we will start the preliminary engineering, the design, permitting, and the environmental surveys. That will get us ready for filing in Q2 to the ICC. That should take about a 6 months to a year review process, and anticipating to get the approval on the route by Q1 of next year, 2027. And then we'll take about need to order the materials, finish up the design, and get land rights to get us ready for construction starting Q4 of 2028 to get us completed with construction in Q2 of 2030. The routing process. So right now we are completing the routing study. The preliminary results of the study have identified several overhead candidate route options, which we have shared at the open houses over the past 2 weeks. An interactive map and a questionnaire are available on the website to collect feedback. ComEd will take into consideration the public feedback and refine the route options down to preferred and alternate routes, which will be shown at the 3rd round of open houses next week. After the 3rd open house, ComEd will file an application with the Illinois Commerce Commission, and the ICC will review the application and approve the final route. And for the real estate portion, we're just going to talk a little bit about an easement. So an easement is a permanent land right authorizing a person or a company to use a portion of the property for a particular purpose or purposes. Typically, landowners can continue to use the land for most purposes. The agreement granting the easement allows ComEd to access the property under certain conditions and build, operate, and maintain the line. If new or supplemental easements are necessary for the project, ComEd will contact landowners directly to discuss the real estate process. And on the engineering portion, we just provided some pictures here to depict what the monopoles will look like. Also, just a little bit of the construction process of how we'll be out there on site, showing just the matting here, which are wood planks that we put down to protect the land underneath us with the construction equipment, and then just showing how the poles will be erected once we put in the foundations. Typically, the poles will be 95 feet high. They will span 725 feet between each pole, and a typical right of way will be a minimum of 150 feet. This here shows the study area with the candidate route options. We have 63 segments of variations of routes, segments of the routes that we are doing the researching and also getting feedback on online and through the open houses. And once we get everything with the studies and the criterias, like I said, with the routing process and the feedback from the public, we will refine this down to 2 routes. And as far as for the overhead construction process, we'll begin with survey and field investigations as soon as particularly the spring and summer, and then that'll lead us into vegetation removal once construction starts, grading and establishing access. Next will be site preparation of those wood planks as I was talking about. Then we'll pour the foundations and set the poles. Then we'll pull the wire and the conductor stringing, and then once construction is complete, we'll restore the land. We're looking for public feedback by March 20th, and you can do that by sending us an email to the project email here. Again, we have questionnaires and interactive maps on the project website, and also we have a project hotline here. And lastly, we have our final round of open houses next week, March 11th in DeKalb County and March 10th in LaSalle. And like we said, there are also, even if you can't attend those open houses, all of the questionnaires and the interactive maps is also available on our website. All right, we're going to open it up to questions.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jasmine. Appreciate you going through that for us. Looks like we do have some questions that came in. So our first question has to do with how we maintain vegetation on the easement, and specifically about organic farming and the use of pesticides. And I'd like to have Jeremy come on screen and talk a little bit about how ComEd manages vegetation and what the impact of pesticides may be to organic farming.
Thanks, Travis. So ComEd uses only pesticides on an as-needed basis for woody vegetation that can grow over 10 feet tall, and we never do that next to agricultural fields during the growing season. If there's no woody vegetation, then we would not be spraying in the right-of-way area. And if there is woody vegetation next to an organic field, then we'd work with the landowner to come up with a specific plan, such as either basal bark or cut stump treatments to eliminate any drift or runoff.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask you to stay on here because we have another question about the easement acquisition process. So once the route is established and ComEd looks to obtain easement rights, how will that process go?
Sure. So ComEd and our land agent, NSI Consulting, will be engaging with landowners as early as this spring to meet with individual folks on site. So ComEd will be negotiating the acquisition of easements based on the appraised fee value for the easement area based on a price per square foot of whatever that total easement may be. Additionally, ComEd will be offering pole payments for the number of transmission poles on a landowner's property. And then lastly, as part of that process, we'll be compensating landowners for any crop damage that happens through our formal claims process that reimburses landowners 100% for crop loss that first year, 50% that second year, and then 25% for that third year. And then finally, once we do come to an agreement with the individual landowners, ComEd will take care of any recording of the documents, any surveying, any of the due diligence activities. Those will be handled by ComEd. No need for a landowner to worry about any open items that need to be addressed.
Thank you, Jeremy. This question is for Jasmine. So this is a long project. It's about 30 miles in length from Sandwich to Mendota. What do we know about how ComEd will construct this? Will they start at one end or the other? Start at Mendota, head to Sandwich, Sandwich to Mendota? What do we know at this point about kind of how ComEd will approach construction?
Yes. So currently, the substation in Mendota is also going through an expansion process or construction process. So they should be completed by the time we start construction. So our plan is to start from the Sandwich substation and then head west. However, with just because we're so early on in the planning process, that plan could change as we get closer to construction. So currently, right now, starting at Sandwich, but it could subject to change.
Thank you. So there's a question here about lights on the structures. And I would ask Tim from our engineering team to join us. Tim, are there any things on these structures, lights, marker balls, anything like that, beyond the image that we saw earlier in the presentation?
To answer that question, we are not totally sure at the moment. So what will happen is if any poles, the minimum threshold is 200 feet. If it goes taller than that, then the lighting automatically. However, we don't anticipate them being that tall. But beyond that, once we site the individual poles, we will file with the FAA, and they will let us know if we require any marker balls or lighting on the line itself. So it's to be determined at the moment, but we don't anticipate the need for lights on them at this moment in time.
So Tim, just to clarify that, you're saying that would not be typical in this scenario to have lights. That would be something that would be atypical.
Correct. We're not currently anticipating lights on there. But once we will know for sure once we file with the FAA, once we have the preferred route in place and we actually start spotting the structures and getting actual heights to file with the FAA.
Excellent. Thank you. So we have a question here for Pamela about what is the general benefit to the region, to Illinois here in the Sandwich and Mendota area. What is the benefit of this project and why is ComEd doing this?
Actually, I'll be taking that,
So,
Travis. Um, just the benefit right now is the grid reliability. Just strengthening the power in the region is the big benefits for this opportunity. Right now, the main thing as far as with the I guess the purpose for the project is with the outages. If there's any outages right now with the current substation, it can take out a lot of customers. But as we strengthen the capacity at that substation, we won't have to worry about those issues there. So basically, just strengthening the grid in that area and having more reliable power.
great. And that leads me into the next question. This one's for you as well. Should customers or residents anticipate any power losses during construction or during this process, or can they expect their power service to be maintained as normal throughout this project?
Power service should be maintained as normal through this project. There is a big planning process with ComEd to make sure that we have the least impact to our customers during any construction process or anything maintenance or anything at our substations or construction in the area.
Excellent. This next question will be for Jeremy. We have a question about farming activity. So as we all know, there's a lot of farms in this area, a lot of agricultural activity in the area. Once these easements are established and this line is in, what will be farmers' abilities to continue farming around these structures, underneath the lines, and so on? What should they expect as an impact to their typical farming operations?
Yep. Thanks, Travis. Absolutely, you will continue to be able to farm the property as you currently do. Obviously, there will be proper clearances that must be maintained with farm equipment from the bottom of the lines. But other than that, you're free to farm the easement area as you did prior to. With respect, obviously, if there are poles, then those will be compensating you for knowing that there'll be an area where that cannot be farmed, and that's where we devised a pole payment to compensate you for that land that is not being able to be farmed. But everything else within inside the easement area, of course, will be able to be farmed.
Excellent. Thank you. This next question is asking us to go back to the structure slide. So Grace, if I could have you kind of click back to the structure slide, and if I could have Tim from engineering join us. So again, asking on the height, the spacing, and kind of what these poles would look like. So Tim, could you just walk us through again some of the information on this slide?
Yeah, for sure. So this is our typical structure we're expecting to have. We're saying typically 95 feet. That could change. It could be a little taller, a little shorter, but roughly most of them be around 95 feet tall, spaced roughly 725 feet apart in a row. But again, that's subject to the specific locations we're putting them. So some could be a little longer, some could be a little shorter. It also depends on the right of way width. We consider all that when doing that. The poles themselves are going to be steel monopoles, like shown here, all on concrete foundations. So no lattice towers that you will see out in the area as well. Right now, we're thinking that the poles will be the weathering steel, which you see in the photo on the top left is a good example. The other option is galvanized, and we can take that feedback to change that. But right now, their ComEd standard would be that Core 10 brownish color pole.
Excellent. Tim, this next one is for you as well. If you could stay on.
Yep.
ComEd does have a lot of structures in the area, and the question is, will these new poles replace any existing poles? So if this were to end up on an existing ComEd easement, would this replace any of the existing poles?
So to answer the question, that yes, if we wind up going on a common easement, there's poles there, we would replace them with this. So typically you'll find a lot of distribution poles. They're wood poles that run along the roads. We would likely have to have those attached at the bottom of these poles, so they would essentially absorb those poles in to the design.
Excellent. Thank you. This next question is about how we route the line and the criteria for routing the process. So I believe there's a slide on here that talks about the routing process, maybe, or at least the candidate route options. And I'll have John from our routing process team talk a little bit about how that works.
Thanks, Travis. I can just talk about the different things that we look at when we're analyzing these multiple route options. We do have a variety of engineering factors that we look at. We have a variety of social factors and also environmental factors that we use when we're conducting our analysis. A couple of examples of engineering factors that we look at is like the total length of the line, the length of the line that maybe does not parallel an existing corridor, such as a road or an existing transmission line. We also look at numbers of roadways that we would have to cross or other existing transmission lines that we would need to cross. Some examples of social criteria that we would look at would be proximity to residences or residential areas, the amount of new right-of-way that we would need to acquire for each route, any historic sites that might be located close to a route option. And then finally, from the environmental standpoint, we would look at things like wetlands that would be located in the right-of-way. We would look for the acres of woodland trees that would need to be removed in the right-of-way. Also, floodplain areas, impacts to those, and protected species, habitat, and federal and state managed lands. Those are all examples of environmental criteria that we would use. So we use a variety of different criteria. We run them through our model and start to look at which route options would be lesser impacting than others.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Thank you for these questions. Please keep them coming in. And remember, you can go to the project website and put more questions through our questionnaire. You can use the interactive map as well, and also use the email and the questionnaires as well. So encourage everyone to go to the project website and do that as well. So we have another question about compensation for folks that live along the line and might be having an easement. So is there any, what happens to folks who are living adjacent to the power lines and homeowners that live adjacent to that? Jeremy, can you talk to the limits of that?
Yeah, of course, Travis. So the value of a particular property depends on a multitude of factors that are very specific to that individual property. So, but in general, the project may support continued property value growth in the area. By meeting the area's electrical needs, this project supports new business development. It'll support job creation and the establishment of new stores, restaurants, and service outlets that contribute to the overall quality of life of the area. So this contributes to the growth of the tax base as well. That's needed to fund quality schools and public services, and all these things are positive factors that support property growth in the community.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to have this one go to our environmental team. So can you talk in general about how the project would be permitted from an environmental standpoint during the construction, just generally?
Yeah, Travis. So for permitting, we have third-party vendors that will go through and review all of the environmental permits that we would need, such as going through wetlands, taking a look at if we need specific permits related to construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for these questions. Continue to ask any of those through the chat. We appreciate all the questions that were received. We have another question about how the construction would be done, and I'll have this for Jasmine. So we saw a diagram earlier of the different phases of clearing the right of way, setting the foundation, setting the poles, stringing the wires. Does that all happen from end to end in that process, or is it done in phases and by section?
Great question. So again, since we're so early in the planning process, we aren't 100% sure how we will do the process, but yes, it will be done in somewhat of like a phase, as far as we might do one of these stages straight for 10 miles and then do the next thing. But typically you might see like the first run to be, 10 miles of setting foundations, and then in the next couple of weeks, you'll see us starting to set poles, and then you'll see us starting to string wires. So it's done in phases in that sense. But again, once we get started planning for construction, we'll have a little bit more details on how it'll be broken down and as far as the timeline for each piece.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you for all the questions that are coming in. So we have a question about the primary and alternate routes, when those will be made public. I'm going to have John from our routing team come on and talk about when we'll be sharing those preferred and alternate routes. And I'll go ahead and answer some of it that once we share them at the open houses, we'll have that on the website as well. But John, I'll have you speak further to that.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. We are working right now on the analysis, finishing that up, and we plan to show at the next round of open houses next week our preferred and alternate route.
Thank you, John. Thank you for all the questions. Again, keep bringing those in. Grace, if you could put the screen on about the different feedback options, appreciate that. So again, we've got the two upcoming open houses next week, March 10th and 11th in DeKalb and LaSalle County. And again, you can use the emails and the project website and the project hotline. That interactive map on our website is a really helpful tool. You can zoom in on your property and put any kind of information you'd like on there. And you can give us any kind of details that you'd like ComEd to know as we work through this process. So we have a question from folks about, can adjacent landowners attach to the line for accessing needed power or providing power generated on their site? And so I'll ask Tim to come on here and speak about whether that's something that is possible.
So generally speaking, these lines are 138 kV. So we do have situations where customers tie in directly into that higher voltage, and then they'll have a substation transform it down to usable power for them. That's a formal process that would have to be negotiated with ComEd. But in terms of residential homes, this is not something that would be directly fed into the homes because it's such a high voltage. And in terms of feeding into the system, this would be very similar to like if a solar farm existed, they would provide power into the grid. And again, that would be something that could be negotiated with ComEd and built out as needed.
Thank you for that. So there's just a question to clarify with Jeremy. Right now, the compensation is just for the easements. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So we do have a question here. I'll ask John again to come back about drainage systems and drainage tiles and being old and fragile. I know that's something that we heard a lot about at our open house meetings. We documented a lot of those drainage tiles on the computer screens. So John, can you just talk about how we document that? And then maybe we can also talk about during construction with Jasmine on how we might work to try our best to avoid some of those things.
Sure, sure. So, being in an agricultural area, we realize that there are lots of drain tiles in many of these fields, and so during our open houses, we did have the invited landowners to come over to our computer stations and mark, locations of those tiles. We certainly take that into consideration when we're looking at potential impacts that each of these routes may present. And then once a preferred route and an alternate route are determined, and especially during after the ICC approves the route prior to construction, we would need to go back and deal with that additionally. And I think Jasmine could probably speak more to that during the construction process.
Repeat that that question again. I'm sorry.
John, what was the last part of that you'd like Jasmine to address?
During the construction process, any processes that would take place to address drain tiles.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, so just again, we do surveying for that. It would be great. I know a lot of farmers is kind of a mixed bag as far as, how well it is documented. So we try our best to one collect that information from the landowners and farmers to spot that, but also we will do some land surveying in those areas.
There's a question about where there'll be another virtual meeting as things progress. I'll go ahead and answer that. So we don't currently have another virtual meeting scheduled, but we do have the project website that will be up throughout the life cycle of the project, and you can continue to expect updates about the project as the project progresses on that website. So I would encourage folks to continue to check in on that website, and there will be updates throughout the life cycle of the project on updates that the community can expect utilizing that website. Yeah. Again, thank you for the questions. So it looks like we have another question about the type of pole that will be built to support the lines. What's the footprint? They apologize. They know they just joined, so I know it's a important question. So we'll go back and touch on it again.
Yeah, so these are going to be monopole structures. So they'll be tubular steel on concrete foundations. Typically, the foundations are anywhere from 6 foot in diameter to up to 10 foot in diameter at certain locations. They're concrete pad or concrete circular pads, and that will be all they would take out. These are not the lattice towers that you will commonly see out there as well, that look kind of like different sections pieced together that take up more land. These are much more narrow.
Again, thank you for the questions. There's some more opportunities there with the email and the website and the hotline. And again, we have the 2 open houses. We had some great turnout at the open house, the first 2 rounds of open houses we had last week and the week before. So we look forward to seeing folks again next week. Appreciate everyone that came out. So there's a question about how we can get existing tile and drainage footprints to you before a route selection occurs. So again, if you wanted to send things via email or put them in the map, the interactive map is actually the best way to do that. You can actually draw a polygon or a line or place pins right directly on your property to indicate where those items may be. So that'd be a great place to start, and that would be very helpful if you could go on there. If you just have a map or another document you want to email us, that works as well. So there's a couple avenues to do that. If you want to come out and talk to us at the meeting next week, we also really appreciate the opportunity to meet with folks there as well. So there's a question about the railroad. So there's a BNFS railroad that runs in the area. And the question is, does ComEd currently have an easement along the railroad? And I'll have Jasmine come along and speak about that. May also have John as well.
We currently don't have an easement along the railroad. That is one of the potential routes out of the 63 segments running along the two railways. Again, we are still in the study phase with that and making sure that is a part of the criteria as far as our distance to how close we are to the railroad. But currently, we do not own any easements in this area along the railroad.
Like that. And Jasmine, if you can come back on that, just we want to clarify on that ComEd doesn't have any transmission level easements, correct? So nothing that would support this type of project. But I just wanted to make that note.
Right.
So. Again, thank you for the questions. All great questions, all very helpful. Appreciate all of that. Again, we've got the information up there on the screen. If anyone, again, encouraging folks to go to the website, go to the email, and call the hotline. We appreciate all that. All right. Any other questions coming through? So on the cost, I can answer that. There's been questions about how is the project paid for. So the cost is shared amongst all PJM customers, and that's the regional transmission operator within the ComEd territory. So everyone within ComEd, within the PJM territory, pays a little bit in transmission fee costs to produce this project. Again, any more questions? We keep these are all great questions. Again, appreciate everyone joining us this evening, taking some time out of your day to learn about this important project for ComEd and for the region. So we do definitely appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. All right. So we do have a question about the visibility of the poles, and I'll ask Tim to join us. I think that's part of the discussion between the regular steel or the weathered steel and how that looks and how they blend into the scenery.
Yeah, so generally the reason we go with the core 10 steel is that it's that brownish color, and it looks more natural and kind of blends in more into the environment that it's going in. That's the main reason why we think it's ideal for this area, rather than having the galvanized, which is a little more shined up in silver. It's a little more striking on the skyline. So we find that these weathering steel poles to blend a little bit better with the natural environment.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask John come up for a question. We have a question about the route segments and what the blue lines mean. Could you clarify what the blue lines are and how we'll only be constructing one route?
Yeah, sure. So we have to get from the Mendota substation to the Sandwich substation, and we have 63 distinct segments that make up this segment network. And we only need to build one line. So we can use any combination of those 63 segments to get from the Mendota substation to the Sandwich substation. And those do not represent a specific width. That's just drawn on the map to represent where that route segment would be. So again, we could use any number of combination of segments to get from point A to point B.
Thank you, John. Mm-hmm. And then actually, I'll ask you to stay on for this, and I'll bring Jasmine on as well for this question to clarify about how close the routes may be to railroads and what the constraints might be there with locating with the railroad. I know we do have some route options that parallel the railroad, but just maybe a little bit more specificity on that, please.
Jasmine, I can speak a little bit to this, but feel free to chime in. We do have several segments that are located along those railroads. We will not be in the railroad right of way. So any segment that is used ultimately for the route would be located outside of the railroad right of way. So ComEd would need to get additional right of way adjacent to the railroad. Those are in play still. We're still looking at those and evaluating those. But again, they would not be utilized within the railroad right of way. They would be adjacent to it.
And then also there's another question. All of these routes that we see in blue right now, those are still part of the route study and under consideration as of this meeting today, correct?
Yes. Again, we have, I think, 63 segments. I believe that combines to about 340 different route alternatives that we're looking at right now.
Thank you, John. Again, thank you for those questions. We'll continue to take questions here as they come in. And again, here's the email, the project website, and the hotline. And again, we look forward to hosting 2 more in-person meetings next week in DeKalb and LaSalle. And so we had a great turnout the previous 2 weeks. We look forward to a great turnout again. And it really helps us advance the project and understand the area and work with the community to advance the project. So we appreciate everyone who's come out to those projects or come out to those public meetings, everyone that's come out this evening for this virtual open house. We really appreciate it. It's getting this type of feedback that really helps us develop a stronger project. So we do appreciate everyone taking the time, coming out to see us, coming out to have a conversation with our subject matter specialists. It means a lot to ComEd, and it's an important part of this process. We value the feedback. It helps us make a better project. We wouldn't take the time to do this if that wasn't the case. So we very much appreciate all the feedback and everyone who comes out and joins us at those public open houses. And again, we look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll give it a few more minutes here to see if we get any more questions about the project. We do have some questions about protection of wildlife in the area and how we mitigate wildlife that may be present in maybe some of the wooded areas or areas that we might be going through. So if Christina is still on, if I could have Christina come back. Christina, could you talk generally about animals and species that might be present, and what is the process to protect those uh, habitats and those creatures as the project progresses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what we'll do is we'll look at all of the endangered species in the area, and depending on what endangered species we're finding, it could be certain types of bats or um, rusty patch bumblebees. What we'll do is we'll look at all of that data, and during certain time frames, we'll look to see if the project can um, bypass those areas or come back to those areas during like so it's not impacting like the nesting season, and looking at roost trees as well. So all of that environmental criteria, especially for like the endangered species, like that will be considered for all of the route options. Doing our best to make sure there's very low impact or no impact at all to those species. Um, and and yeah, I think that will address like all of the wildlife that would impact these routes.
Thank you very much. All right. Any other questions from the group? Again, appreciate all the questions that have come in. Give it a few more minutes here. So I think that there's been some other questions about um, the benefits to the projects, specifically on resiliency and reliability. So Jasmine, can you join us again and just reiterate generally how the project supports resiliency, reliability, and just helps keep the power on in the region and protect against storm events and other things that we might be facing as a community.
Yes. So, again, just one of the main purposes for this project is right now we have what we call here is a single point failure. So we have it's a smaller substation. So with if we do say have an outage at that substation, it could take out a lot of customers um, just because of just because of that one basically equipment there. Just increasing the substation and increasing the capacity there, it strengthens the reliability if, say, something like an outage happens, if it's storm or if it's planned. So that's just really the big driver there as far as that impact. Just increasing that substation, which is why we need the line to come in. Um, it increases just that reliability on the substation and for the reliability actually for the customers um, if there is impacts with outages and stuff like that.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, good. All right, so we're available to take a few more questions here if anybody has any more. Again, the project website's there available to you, as well as the email. Um, there's a question about distance between homes and power lines. So if I could have Jeremy come back on and talk about the easement width and what does that mean for structures and easement? If you can kind of clarify that.
Yeah, sure thing, Travis. So the easement width that we're looking for is 150 feet of right of way. So not only does that take into consideration ComEd's facilities within inside that easement, but also vegetation clearances on both ends. So based on the location of the transmission facilities in the center of that right of way, 75 feet on each side of that center line should provide adequate distance to ensure safety and reliability from individuals that may be adjacent to the transmission line itself.
So would that mean that typically structures would be possibly allowed outside that 75 feet?
Correct. Yes. Sorry, Travis. Yeah, that would be the case. Correct.
Okay. It says once the route is determined, how will we talk to landowners and how will that process start? So, Jeremy, I might have you come back and once that we have a route and we start those conversations, how will that look? Should landowners look for a knock on their door? Will they get a letter, a phone call, a drive-by? Kind of explain what they could expect if they happen to live on one of the routes selected.
Yeah, we'll try and contact landowners based on all of the information that we have. A lot of people were willing enough to provide their phone or email address when we had some of the open houses. If we have your information, we'll contact you that way. If not, it may be a knock on the door, but ComEd with our partner NSI Consulting that is the land agent on this project will be in the area, boots on the ground, meeting with landowners individually to discuss the potential route and the easement area that may be affected. So we'll have that negotiation as early as later this spring, and we'll be happy to meet with landowners and address their concerns and work to come to an agreeable solution.
So basically, in other words, Jeremy, ComEd and its partners are going to take numerous steps to reach out and talk to landowners before any work happens on these easements, correct?
Absolutely. It's in all of the above.
And that, and I might add too, Jeremy, that also includes a letter, correct? Which they possibly would receive in the mail based on their mailing address for their parcel records as well.
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for that. Good questions, all good questions. Again, Grace, if you could put the contact information back up. So again, we are taking some comments here for through March 20th for this phase of the project. And again, there's multiple ways to contact us: the email, the project website, and the hotline. And again, we look forward to being out in the community in person next week, speaking with folks in DeKalb County and LaSalle County at those two opportunities. So we look forward to having folks out for that as well. We'll give it a few more minutes here to see if we get any last questions. Again, appreciate everyone joining us today and being part of this. It's an important part of our project, and we appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. I know we've spent a good amount of time here, an hour, answering some questions and going through the presentation. So appreciate everyone joining us and asking questions. So there's a question about how close the line would be to your home's yard and being 75 feet. So Jeremy, I'll have you come back and again, kind of explain how that easement works and how close, and clarify that the easement would be in private property as well. So.
Yeah, of course, Travis. As we had mentioned, there will be a 150-foot easement with the facilities being in the center line of that easement. So 75 feet on each side for not only the facilities, but any vegetation growth. So that is obviously the clearance that based on, not only our engineering feedback, but also, risks to structures or anything that might come within that. That's why we're obtaining that corridor of 75 feet.
And just for clarity as well, that easement width of 150 feet, 75 on either side, that's the width for the life of the project, correct?
Correct.
And yep.
That is a permanent easement that will be there for the life of the project, as well as run with the land.
Okay. And there's also questions about maybe temporary easements for construction. Could you talk about any possible need for construction access agreements or temporary easements beyond that, and how that process might work?
Yeah, of course. So at this time, I don't anticipate the need for temporary easements, but that could occur. So what we usually do in cases where we might need temporary rights, we would approach the landowner and then have a discussion on that. Just like, negotiation that would normally occur between two individuals, we'd request access through that area and work with the landowner to determine, what would be best, not only to access the facilities, but also to ensure, their preferred way for us to do it. We'll, at all possible, work with landowners, but ideally, because of the 150-foot right of way, we'll do our best to stay in that corridor to access our project area.
Okay. And this is kind of I might need a couple folks to answer this question. So first, I think it's a routing question. There's a question about if there's structures currently within that easement right now. And John, if you could come back and kind of talk about, how you factor in current structures as you're looking at these possible routes.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. We do our best when we are developing these routes to not have any structures within what we believe would be the 150-foot easement. I actually don't think we have a criteria that measures number of structures within the easement, because the goal would be to not have any structures within what we believe would be the easement for any particular route that we develop. I guess there's always a chance that something would be there that we didn't see, like a shed or something. If that's the case, I believe that we would shift the route as needed to avoid that, if at all possible. Other than that, I would probably need to have like an engineer answer that question further.
Yep. I was going to go to that too. So,
yeah.
So Tim from our engineering team, and then also Jeremy too. So it's also a real estate question. So Tim, from an engineering perspective, can talk about what that means if there's possibly incompatible structures within that 150 feet. And then Jeremy can kind of talk about how that conversation might go with the landowner if that's unavoidable based on what John said.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of, a part of our design when we're looking and designing these is we have electrical clearances that are mandated, like nationally, that we adhere to. So when designing this, if we were to be within the 75 feet of that, just from a purely engineering perspective, we would maintain electrical clearances that are mandated to prevent any issues. So we would design to have the proper clearances for it. I mean, it's less than 75 feet, but and just from a purely engineering perspective. But I think the easement and real estate is probably more a pertinent answer for this, because that would be more dictated of the easement. And yeah, I defer to Jeremy for that.
Yeah, of course, Tim. And as John mentioned, we do our best to avoid any possible routes and take these kind of things into consideration while we're doing the design. And frankly, why we have these meetings is for landowner feedback. And, hey, if there's something that maybe we didn't catch that is on, that is notated and on, but as John has said, we've done very careful due diligence to make sure that structures are not impacted. If for some reason that a structure is impacted, at that point we would have a negotiation and discussion with the landowner on possibly moving that structure or compensating the landowner in a way that makes them whole for the relocation or the removal.
Then one more question for you, Jeremy, talking about the easement and roads. And if he were to be along a road, would that second 75 feet hang over the road and then you'd only need a 75-foot backside easement? Or kind of talk about how being in what we'd call a road right of way versus being in private easement, and what's the ComEd approach to that?
Yeah, and that's frankly very possible. So depending on whether your specific property or a particular property has centerline ownership, or whether there is public highway, there is the opportunity for the transmission easement to overhang a road. So at that point, that may not impact. You may not have 150 feet of impact to your property. But ultimately, there might be a discussion that's had, based on your preferred, how this impacts your property. We take careful consideration to understand the current use of the property. So if at all possible, we look at things like, can a combine head get around a pole between where the pole location is and that road right of way? So, obviously with some things, once we get a little further into constructability, sometimes the construction folks have to put the pole line in a specific place, but we will do everything we possibly can to work with landowners and try and make this as easy of a process as possible for them to continue to use their land.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Again, thank you for all your questions today. There's the email there, the hotline, the website. Again, the 2 open houses coming next week as well. Appreciate everyone coming out. Give it a few more minutes here. See if we have any more questions at the moment. There's a question about farmland and working with the landowners. Jeremy, can you kind of speak to how each of those negotiations are individualized, and those are conversations with the landowner, and how that process might go?
Yeah, of course. So as we kind of alluded to, everybody's specific property has a myriad of different things that make it unique, and obviously then there is that uniqueness obviously attributes value to it. So ComEd is going to be getting appraisals for the parcels that we acquire. So based on the fair market value of your property, ComEd will be offering a specific number. I can't speak to that number right now because frankly, the value of your property is going to appreciate by the time we have this discussion, and we want to be honest with it, and we want to be fair, and we want to be forward with you, and at the time of that discussion, we want to offer you a fair compensation for your property at fee value for that easement area. So as I mentioned too, depending on the transmission structures that may or may not fall on your property, there may also be pole payments, but those discussions will all be very individualized. They will be unique and specific to your individual property, and they will be on a individual basis with each landowner. There's not going to be a one size fits all point process. You know, because this isn't a one size fits all. These are, individual landowners with individual properties, and they deserve the respect of having that individual attention and discussion when we go to move forward and negotiate with each individual person.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a question about farm equipment and clearance on the lines. I'll have Grace cycle back to the diagram of the line, and then I will have Tim join us again and speak to that as well.
Yeah, so when we're coming with our clearance values, we assume that the maximum size vehicle on farmland will be 14 foot tall by 30 foot long. And that by assuming that size, when we design to ground, we consider the vehicle being 14 foot tall.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. Any other questions this evening? These have all been great questions. I appreciate the engagement, and we enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to interface with folks and answer these questions and be with you this evening. Again, we look forward to seeing you face to face as well out in the community next week at DeKalb and in LaSalle. You'll get to talk to many of the folks that you saw this evening, answer questions. Many of the same individuals will be there going over many of the same materials. There was a question about when the preferred and alternate routes will be chosen. We hope to have those next week at those two meetings, and then folks will be notified on the website as well. So we hope to have that information here very shortly. All right. I'll give it. I got a 6:09 on the time here. I will give it a couple more minutes here to 6:11. If we don't get any more questions here until by that time, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for the evening. But again, appreciate the time that everyone shared with us this evening. I appreciate all the colleagues from ComEd and our subject matter specialists who answered questions for us this evening. Jasmine that took us through the presentation. Thank you all for being a part of this and sharing your evening with us. And to all of you with the public who joined us, asked some great questions and took the time to learn a little bit more about this project. We really do value the feedback. It really does help us make a stronger project. And so again, I'll reiterate the email that you see on the screen, the website, the project hotline. And again, on that website, you can find the interactive map. So we talked a lot about drainage tiles. We talked a lot about different structures that may be near the easement. We talked about different farming activities. All those things are very valuable information that you can put on that interactive map that helps us very much. So we appreciate if you have the opportunity to go onto the website, use the interactive map, make those comments on the map. That's really helpful to us. And then again, we're also available if you call that project hotline, leave a message, and Grace and other colleagues will get back to you within 48 business hours and speak with you and answer any questions you might have. So appreciate you using all those tools and appreciate you engaging with us. And I'll give it here about 2 more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up the call if we don't have any more questions. So. Got about a few more seconds here. Don't see any more additional calls. We will go ahead and wrap up for the evening. So again, thank you all for joining us. I appreciate you spending some time. Please visit the project website, look for project updates there. Please come out and see us next week. Have a conversation with many of the people who answered questions here this evening. We look forward to it. It helps us build a stronger project. Thank you for coming out to learn more about ComEd's Sandwich to Mendota Area Reliability Transmission Project, the SMART project. Please have a good and safe evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. We'll go ahead and wrap up tonight's call. Thank you.